Dr. Brabrand, what do you think the objective of family life education is?
I think the objective of family life education is to provide our students with the knowledge and supports for them as they go through school to deal with topics that many may have in their conversations in homes, but they may not necessarily have. And I think the school has to be a trusted partner with families. And I believe family life education has had a long history in Fairfax County of being a place where information can be shared that can be helpful for students and helping them as they move through the continuum of growing up. And it's a place for the social emotional supports that we've been talking about as a board and a leadership team over the last few years.
Okay, I appreciate that. That's good off the cuff. I wanted to just have kind of like what your baseline was. So in that regard, I guess one, I'm a little bit concerned about the question that the discussions they may not be having at home, but let's just put that aside. I guess my fundamental question then is maybe to Dr. Presidio. Do you feel at any point with some of the language that's provided here, or maybe even some of the language that's been embedded previous to this, that we've crossed sort of the Rubicon of giving information that is necessary for the development of students, for the parents who opt in teaching about sexual reproduction and what they need to know about their bodies, to actually, going well beyond that, teaching how to have sex or the way to think about sex as opposed to learning about their bodies and reproductive cycles and, things like sex trafficking and everything else. Do you feel like we've pushed beyond that in the development of our own system-based curriculum that's not the state's?
Well, I would say a couple things to that. First, I think it's important, and I appreciate your original questions with Dr. Brabrand as well. It's important to recognize that VDOE provides guidance around the standards that we need to talk about, and there's objectives related to each of those, right? So one of them is around human sexuality. And I think the question in terms of like, what are the values that we want to really be, focused on in our curriculum is more of a question for the community than it is for me. That's the role, I think, of the FLECAC committee. It's the role of board members to determine the appropriateness of the inclusion of topics in the curriculum. The report that we're providing to the board is the committee's report. As I mentioned, there are 33 voting members. Central office staff are not voting members on the committee. So I think that is really the question that the board always has to try to answer. Are we reflecting our community's needs well in our program?
Okay, so I'm really glad you brought that up, because you said, what the values are that we're trying to message comes from the community, and that's the point of the committee. And I appreciate Mr. Moon highlighting that at the bottom of these, to my knowledge, I didn't see any votes ever totaled to 33. And so that, I think, becomes the essence of the issue. Is you, Dr. Brabrand, on an off-the-cuff question, your answer included a trusted partner with families. You, Dr. Presidio, included in your off-the-cuff answer that the message is, the message of what we message in terms of values is for the community to speak. So the question becomes truly, how representative of the community is FLECAC? And when you point, and if you could go to the slide that you list a couple of organizations that you say include sex assigned at birth in particular. I want to highlight those because, like what I've just described is one of my concerns, these organizations in potentially in outward statements, although internal documents say otherwise, the APA, those decisions about that definition are made by a small committee. They're not made by the 66,000 doctors or whomever. Whereas the American College of Pediatrics, their doctors do vote. And so yes, that's only 20,000, but they do vote on what that is. And I'm wondering, when you take a term like that, what does our biology curriculum teach? Because you said this is limited only to the FLE curriculum, then how are you aligning what is taught here to, if they leave FLE and then go into their biology portion of their curriculum, how is, and not to use a pun, but how do you transition from what's said in an FLE curriculum under this guise versus what's taught as a part of biology?
Yeah, I think that's a good question again. I mean, I do want to reread the definition that we use in the FLE program, because I think it's very important to understand that when we are talking about the terminology sex assigned at birth, we're using that in conjunction with our definition of biological sex. So again, grade 8, because that's where this recommended change would be in the FLE program. In grade 8, in our definitions for biological sex, which are in the curriculum, and nothing in these recommendations on the part of the committee this year would remove, our definition of grade 8 biological sex is that a person's biological sex is the sex that they're assigned at birth and associated primarily with the physical attributes, their reproductive anatomy, and other anatomical physiological structures, chromosomes and hormones. So those are the things that we discuss in biology, to your question.
So we had, and unfortunately my children were in that time period, we had a Virginia history book for years that was riddled with errors. We didn't keep teaching it because it was already in the curriculum. So, just because it occurs someplace else doesn't mean we transfer the knowledge into FLE. And my problem is that what do you teach children about the sex of a fetus that's internal still to the mother? Do you teach them that you can't assign a sex before birth? So this is where it starts to unravel, really, for me, is what is it that is necessary to make this change that makes the curriculum better or more accurate? And I haven't been able to find anything that says that there's any medical community consensus that this is actually medical fact. In fact, it's not, because we know that people find out the sex of their children before they're born. So sex assigned at birth, denies the fact that we're determining sex prior to birth. So the medical accuracy, when we're getting down to what we're teaching children as facts, because this is supposed to be an education, what is it that is factually accurate is where I struggle in particular with this. I agree with the change that Mr. Moon has highlighted in particular. I am worried that we have educators, and I brought this up to your predecessor, Dr. Braybrand, who basically I think should be granted, conscientious objector status. And I know we don't force anybody to teach this, but there are people who have been teaching family life education for decades in FCPS, who have privately come forward and said they can't teach it anymore if we do this, because it's no longer, not only is it not medically accurate, now they'll be violating their conscience, either from a cultural background, from a religious background, from a moral background, any number of concerns have come up there. So then do we have people who are not necessarily the committed FLE educators who've been teaching it for, again, many, many years now, who have a passion for imparting medically accurate information to children, now no longer willing to teach, then who does teach? The people who are less passionate about it, now we're sort of stiff-arming people into the role. So I'm concerned about that. Just like we were saying earlier about what is our job versus what is a medical doctor's job versus what is a private clergy member's job, with regard to the discussion around PrEP, there are no CDC and no FDA clinical guidelines or protocols for children under the age of 18. And actually, it only says adult, and there's some documents that say they're even concerned because they haven't defined what an adult is. And so if CDC and FDA don't have any clinical guidelines or any protocol for the delivery of there's a highly controversial drug within, certain communities, why would we then embed that type of information? And if anybody says to us, well, because another school district does, that's the worst possible. I mean, because somebody else does it, we should do it too. I mean, that's the last place of resort. What is the medical information? And then you get down into the issue with this and other issues around what are the risks. I mean, if the objective with FLE is to act in partnership with parents, as a trusted partner of parents, and to work with the community to reflect the values that the community wants us to impart, and it's only a few people that are deciding this, and I don't really see any staff opposition to anything, so it's clearly driven by the committee, then what we're saying is that we don't have to impart things like, what are the risks? What are the risks with an abortion? What are the risks with medical or pharmaceutical interventions like PrEP? If we're not going to delve down into risks, I mean, that's actually really medically accurate information that allows people to weigh the consequences of, should I take this, should I not take this, should I pursue this, should I not pursue this? Let me fully understand. I mean, any commercial from Big Pharma that you hear, I mean, it's somewhat, I mean, they make SNL skits out of, side effects could include. If we won't include that, then how are we being medically accurate? So I think there are a lot of concerns here about the reasonableness of where we've gone with some of this information. It's not that we don't provide it for who may need it. I do think that we have to be a resource in the event that there are some who need it, but enforcing it on everyone and professing that, well, some families can opt out. Well, we have admission creep is really what the answer is. And then what is said once we leave the classroom, what's said in FLE doesn't stay in FLE. It's not the Vegas of our curriculum. So I do think that there are some pretty significant concerns that you should look at based on your first initial guidance to us, that this is supposed to be a trusted partnership and that it is supposed to be reflective of what the community messages. And I don't think that we have a meeting of the minds that we really have done the public engagement. The state guidelines, and you underline should, which I found curious. The State Department of Education is saying we should do this. We should have parents. We should do broad community engagement. Not having a presentation on Thursday, and I understand that's historically been the approach, is that it's addressed in a work session like this. The public doesn't see a work session like this like they do a regular board meeting. A online survey at the end of the school year with the graduations, pressing down on us. SOLs are happening right now. AP and IB exams. This is a very stressful time of the school year, and to say that this is a reasonable expectation of what the state is looking for in terms of the involvement of parents and the involvement of the community for broad engagement, particularly when you're dealing with the most controversial issues, I don't think is representative of the word should by emphasizing, well, it says you should. Doesn't mean you have to. Yeah, the clear intent from the State Board of Education is that there be broader engagement.